All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. Today, we're uncovering how the Byzantine Empire evolved way beyond its Roman roots and became this absolute powerhouse of political and architectural innovation. When we think about antiquity fading into the Middle Ages, we usually picture total collapse and ruin, right? But over in the East, well, an entirely different story was unfolding. It's a story of survival, major adaptation, and, honestly, absolute brilliance. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to journey from the empire's distinct cultural foundation right through its monumental leaps in government, law, and structural engineering. Section 1. The birth of a distinct culture. We're kicking things off by examining exactly how New Rome transformed into an entirely unique civilization. By surviving as the longest-lasting medieval power for over 12 centuries, the Byzantine Empire was, well, it was so much more than just a dying ember of antiquity. While the Western Roman Empire totally collapsed in 476 CE, the East, centered around the incredibly strategic and incredibly wealthy city of Constantinople, they kept the flame alive all the way until 1453. That's a massive run. But, to just call them a continuation of Rome, that really doesn't do them justice at all. Notice the stark cultural shift here. Now, while the Byzantines actually called themselves Romans and referred to their capital as New Rome, their day-to-day reality was profoundly different from the days of Julius Caesar. For the vast majority of their history, they were distinctly Greek in language. And crucially, this is a big deal, they completely redefined how social mobility and power worked. In ancient Rome, power often just sat with an aristocracy of blood nobility. You were born into it. But in the Byzantine reality, there was really no aristocracy of blood as such. Instead, the Senate in Constantinople was made up of men who had actually risen through the ranks of military service or maybe gained imperial patronage. So things like education, wealth accumulation, and imperial favor, those became the new ladders to climb society. It was a whole new ballgame. Moving on to Section 2, the Emperor and the State. Let's see how all of this builds into an entirely new, highly orchestrated political system. So the empire was steered by the basileus, a ruler whose power was literally absolute. Residing in the magnificent Great Palace of Constantinople, the emperor didn't rule alone, though. He was supported by this widespread, incredibly intricate bureaucracy. We're talking regional governors, loyal ministers, and even a really powerful court of eunuch chamberlains who could actually control direct access to the emperor himself. They were the gatekeepers. Look at the sheer concentration of authority here. The emperor wielded unmatched power. He was the commander-in-chief of the military, head of the church and government, and the ultimate controller of state finances. I mean, very few rulers in history have ever held that much sweeping authority. But, and it's a big but, it came with a massive caveat. The emperor was expected to rule wisely, justly, and most importantly, successfully. If you couldn't defend the borders, or if you brought economic catastrophe to the empire, well, the generals in Constantinople and out in the provinces could and absolutely would remove you. So in real terms, the army remained the most powerful institution. You had to keep them happy. Because of this constant threat of removal and the fact that there were actually no strict set rules for succession, emperors had to get pretty creative to maintain their grip on power. To survive for 12 centuries, they essentially engineered continuity through a carefully orchestrated marketing strategy. First, they cultivated this aura of divine selection by wearing magnificent robes of Tyrian purple. Then, they'd use the state mint to stamp coins showing their chosen successors, which was often an eldest son, just to normalize the transition early on. And they deliberately copied the reign names of illustrious predecessors. Constantine was a massive favorite for sure. It was all about projecting this image of unbreakable divine continuity. All right, Section 3, rewriting the rule of law. Let's look at one of their absolute most enduring political achievements, how they completely re-engineered the legal system. Look at that number, over 1 million words. That represents the immense scale of the legal documentation they had to wrangle. By the 6th century, Roman law was, frankly, an absolute mess. It was this massive, totally contradictory accumulation of centuries of imperial edicts, sprawling legal opinions, and endless lists of crimes and punishments. It was bloated, it was confusing, and it was almost entirely unworkable. So, enter Emperor Justinian I. He commissioned a panel of legal experts to take that unwieldy mountain of legal chaos and relentlessly edit, revise, and condense the whole shebang. The result? The Corpus Juris Civilis, which is more commonly known to us as the Justinian Code.
And here is exactly why this matters today. By clarifying these laws for all citizens, the Justinian Code severely reduced the number of cases that were unnecessarily brought before courts, and it vastly sped up the judicial process. But its true legacy? That's its longevity. This framework lasted for 900 years within the empire, and it eventually became the absolute blueprint for the legal systems used in most Western democracies right now. Seriously, when you look at modern civil law, you are literally looking at Byzantine political engineering.
Section 4. Engineering the heavens. Pivoting from the laws that govern the people, let's go ahead and explore the structures that inspired them. Byzantine architects stepped boldly away from classical antiquity. You see, while ancient Greek and Roman builders often obsessed over these perfect, mathematically proportionate exterior facades for their temples, the Byzantines went a different route. They developed a highly eclectic style that cared far more about breathtaking interiors. They heavily prioritized interior function. They'd frequently reuse materials from older buildings, mixing them with large bricks, really thick mortar, and hidden concrete wall cores. So the outside might actually look relatively plain, but the inside, that was designed to be an entirely transcendent experience. And nowhere is this interior spectacle more evident than the Hagia Sophia, dedicated to the holy wisdom of God. Built in an astonishingly short period, we're talking just 5 years between 532 and 537 CE. Its sheer scale is just mind-boggling. With a rectangular base of nearly 75 by 70 meters, this architectural marvel remained the largest church in the entire world until the 16th century. I mean, wow. 55 meters. That is how high the enormous domed ceiling hovered above the floor. Just imagine that for a second. You're walking from the noisy, bustling, dusty streets of medieval Constantinople and stepping into a space where the ceiling is soaring 18 stories right above your head. It must have been unbelievable. So, how did they pull this off without the roof just instantly collapsing under its own massive weight? Well, Byzantine architects achieved a spectacular structural feat. They spanned a dome nearly 32 meters across by resting it on 4 massive arches, utilizing these specific architectural elements called pendentives. This ingenious design distributed the weight absolutely flawlessly. It made the massive dome look as though it wasn't even held up by heavy stone, but rather seemed almost magically suspended by the heavens themselves. It was literally designed to make you feel the divine presence the second you walked in the doors. Which brings us to Section 5, a heritage carved in stone. Let's examine how this engineering genius echoed throughout history. You know, what made Byzantine architecture so powerful wasn't just the one-off creation of the Hagia Sophia. It was their ability to actually systematize their genius. They created a highly repeatable architectural blueprint using what's called a cross and square plan. They would take a square base, branch it out into bays with half domes, and then elevate the central dome on a polygonal drum so high it almost looked like a tower. This completely revolutionized building design. It created spaces that were highly functional for complex religious rituals while still being visually spectacular. And as this quote directly from our source material highlights, this definitely wasn't just a local trend confined to medieval Constantinople. The Byzantine aesthetic, the soaring domes, the cross and square plans, those glittering interior mosaics, it became the permanent architectural vocabulary for Orthodox Christian architecture everywhere. From Eastern and Central Europe all the way up into Russia, these principles were exported, adapted, and replicated. So, I want to leave you with this to ponder today. The political entity known as the Byzantine Empire may have officially ended when the walls of Constantinople were finally breached in 1453. But when you look at the fundamental foundations of our modern Western laws, and when you look up at the soaring dome spanning the globe today, did this incredibly innovative empire actually end, or did it just rebrand the world? Think about that the next time you look at a modern courtroom or step into a classic cathedral. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep that curiosity alive.